I want to. I'm sorry, I'm just diving in here, you know. Um, just want to welcome you here. And so Anne and Annette and Catherine and Frederick, Ishtar and Karen, Kim, Leslie, Laurie, Martha, and Michael Lemmer. Okay. Um, Rebecca, Stephen, Tia, Walter, and Zenaidi, and over here on the staff side, Joe and Michael, Stacy, and Tuya. Um, so thank you for joining us. You know, when we're doing these in the morning, we have mostly Europe and Australia, New Zealand. And occasionally people on the West Coast and in Arizona join us for a late night run into esoteric astrology and the science of triangles. Okay. So we ended with the idea that there are 4 constellations, as you know, which convey the required energies which will make humanity divine. Well, maybe the word divine has to be even distinguished from the word spiritual. He often does that, you know. And whereas spirituality is associated with the egoic lotus, or, you know, with the causal body, divinity is associated with the monad and with the higher 2 planes of the of any 7-planed system. So if we were to look here, what we would find is that these are the 2 divine planes, and the spiritual hierarchy and the egoic lotus are considered one category below that and are spiritual. And then we have everything that exists on the 18 lower subplanes as basically personal. So there's a division into 3. But anyway, you know, this is DK's presentation to us in terms of some of these very remote energies. I mean, they're very high, and they affect the planetary logos and the whole solar system, but eventually they have this effect upon the human being. So they will make humanity divine, and they are Aries, Leo, 2 fire signs, Scorpio, and Aquarius, a water sign and an air sign. And one of the things that you want to notice about them, as I said before, is that all of them have a strong rulership by Uranus. Aries is hierarchically ruled by Uranus. Leo is hierarchically ruled by Uranus, but in a veiled form. So the sun veils Uranus as the hierarchical ruler. Uranus is exalted in the sign Scorpio, and so this ends up being a very transformational sign and puts people through drastic changes. And Aquarius is not only the orthodox or the exoteric ruler of Aquarius, but when you look at the hierarchical ruler of Aquarius, it's the moon, and 3 planets are being veiled by that moon, and they are Uranus, Neptune, and the Vulcan. And the topmost planet is Uranus. So Uranus has a profound effect on Aquarius. He says, I won't enter into an analysis of them, as this was covered when we studied each of them earlier and separately. I would, however, like to point out that each of these constellations is closely connected as a transmitter of energy with certain stars. That's the point that we're going to be getting into in this next section. Certain stars lying outside our zodiac altogether, and thus connecting our tiny planet with certain great focal points of energy. And the stars in question are the most distant pointer for Aries. I'll show you. Right here is a diagram. This star Merak is the Aries star, and surprisingly, we'll get into it. It has a unifying effect. This star Dubhe is the Leo star, and it has a more personal effect, but each one of them, of course, is a great deity. So we can only talk about what are the abilities of man to absorb what they send. And then those are the ones having to do with the Big Dipper. And let's see here. We have also the star Sirius, which is very close, only 8 light years away. Only. That's a huge distance, but at least in terms of stars, it's very close. So that's the star connected with Scorpio. And then about 410 light years away is Alcyone or Alcyone, which is the central star of the Pleiades, and it's associated with Aquarius, and I think it's sometimes called the star of the individual. So those are the 4 stars that I think we're going to take up here, and they do form some interesting triangles, but the triangles are so potent that they are, way beyond what the human being alone can absorb. It's the planet that is absorbing, and from the planet comes the effect upon the human being. So that's just a little review of where they are and what we're dealing with. These points, they are probably not in the forefront of our mind all the time, but if we're going to conduct studies in esoteric astrology, and especially in the science of triangles aspect of esoteric astrology, then we have to know some of these things. Aries, now we're into what the Tibetan says, and when this is in black, it's what he is writing, and the other things are mostly commentary. Aries is called the initiator of impulses. Also, the birthplace of ideas, but for this particular way of understanding, the initiator of impulses, and this is important, either the impulse to incarnate, let form again be sought, or the impulse to return to the originating source. Something happened there. Okay. So sometimes when, as when you are looking to change your way of being entirely and reorient yourself, Aries is involved with that through Uranus. Okay. And let's see. I think that will be enough there. Okay. And it's closely in touch with one of the stars in the Great Bear, to which we give the name pointer. There are 2 pointers, and Aries is the farthest pointer. In other words, Merak, the star associated with Aries, is the pointer farthest from Polaris. And Polaris is considered to be a great star of direction. And maybe, we'll notice a few apparent contradictions here. But Aries, which is such a first-rate sign, is associated with what is probably a sixth-ray star. But of course, just the way our sun has all the different rays, so these stars will have as well all the different rays. The way we number the stars is first ray Bennett Nash, second ray Mizar, third ray Alioth, fourth ray Megrez, fifth ray Dubhe, sixth ray Merak, and seventh ray Fegida. And when you look up the meanings of these different stars, and I would suggest maybe Richard Hinckley Allen's book on star names. That's one way to do it. You'll see that a lot of the lore associated with these stars is also conveying something of the ray, which I found satisfying and unusual. So anyway, Merak is a sixth-ray star, but Aries is the major first-ray constellation. Leo is another first-ray constellation, but of the three fire constellations, it represents the second aspect. So it's more the personality, and Merak is more the soul. Now, you know, we only know a very little bit about some of the properties of these great sources. And Polaris, you know, we can connect with the monad and also with the Ajna center, because it's, yeah, the whole of the little bear represents the Ajna center of a great being, I believe, anyway. And the seven stars of the Great Bear represent seven internal head centers in this great being that we've been calling enigmatically the one about whom naught may be said. So these, you know, when constellations represent chakras, you know you're dealing with a very great being, at least great when you compare that being to the planets and even to solar systems. There are other, of course, far greater beings. So anyway, this pointer, farthest from Polaris, is a major star of direction, because through it, and watch out for Decade's qualifiers, through it in this world cycle, so he gives a hint, you know, that it may not always be so, flows the will to unify and to bring about synthesis. Now, would you think, you might look at Aries and you would think, yes, synthesis, okay. And, but Aries is a great first ray sign. So what about unification? But it's interesting that the three aspects of divinity, another triangle, are associated with Aries. It's the first ray constellation. It is also the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world, which ties it in with the Christ phenomena, the Christ work of sacrifice on the second ray. And it is also associated with the will to create, which connects it to the third ray. So while there may be a major kind of ray associated with any of these sources, they really have it all, and we have to detect the major rays at least when looking at these constellational sources. Okay, so this pointer, the second star, from Polaris, at least in terms of our visual apprehension of it. It might look all quite different if you were at a different point in space. And that is a big question. How come it is that our angle on things actually correlates with the meaning of those things to us? In other words, if we were located in an entirely different uh, place of orientation in space, the meaning might be different. I remember a man who wrote a book called The Geometry of Meaning, or maybe it's The Meaning of Geometry. I think it was Geometry of Meaning. And basically he said that position with respect to each other determines meaning. Okay, so through Merak, we connect with the soul and with the will to unify. Now, every soul, regardless of its ray, is ultimately representing an aspect of the human energy system which leads towards unification. So here is the Tibetan speaking again. This is the force which brings about the fusion or integration of the personality. And really, you know, it's not alone. All three of the fire signs do that. Sagittarius brings in alignment. Leo brings in distinction of one personality from another. And Aries, representing synthesis, works through lesser factors relating to synthesis, which we call integration and fusion. So here we have Aries and Merak representing the soul and not the spirit in this particular context. Though if you're looking for the major source of the first ray and of will, you're going to find that Aries fills that role. So anyway, this is the force which brings about the fusion or integration of the personality. Now just think for a moment about yourself, or the apparent self anyway. And to what extent do you find yourself a fused, an integrated personality? That's one thing. And then a personality that is in a state of fusion with the soul, which means that some degree of soul infusion will be occurring for you, depending upon, maybe what initiatory experiences you have been through. By the time we reach the fourth degree, we are entirely soul infused, and then it's possible for the what we normally call the soul. It's not really, but at least the causal body will disappear. You know, and when you think about your degree of integration, your degree of fusion and soul infusion, there's oftentimes one vehicle or the functioning of one vehicle that is either contributing to incompleteness of that fusion, or which is in the way somehow of that fusion. So all of us, we have plenty of work to do as we are trying to fuse the triangle that we call, and this is interesting, the soul, the disciple, and the personality. The disciple is not the personality. It's a triangle here, and the disciple is the soul in incarnation. And the soul on its own plane we simply call the soul. But, ultimately we're going to call the spiritual triad the soul when the causal body disappears. So this is a unitive star, and it has, I think, in the way of naming the rays to the star, it has the sixth ray associated with it, and maybe the first ray in the synthetic aspect. But when you look at the will to be, the will to synthesize, and the will to destroy, you can associate the will to, it's another triangle, you can associate the will to be with the first ray, the will to synthesize with the second subsidiary ray of the first ray, 1, 1, 1, 2, and the will to destroy, usually by the aspects of matter, the third aspect, the will to destroy, and the third aspect. This was interesting. He once said that he was talking about death in terms of the will, and he said that the death of a Hitler, which took place because of material circumstances, was a very different thing than the death of a Jesus or a Father Damien. What a big hint about Father Damien, who went to the Molokai Island in Hawaii and took care of the people afflicted with leprosy until he sacrificed his own life doing it. Obviously, a fourth initiation situation, a very different thing from the normal will to destroy. Okay, so fusion, integration, the at-one-ment of personality and soul, and the unification of humanity. Now, we lift this onto a higher turn of the spiral, not just the individual man, but the unification of humanity, maybe its personality, or the great approach of the hierarchy to humanity, a fusion between hierarchy and humanity. And, sometimes we read that Aries is bringing in the new age, or at least it provides the impulse which gets the new age going. And I think we can see that this new age will be consisting. One of the factors that is major about it is the unification of hierarchy and humanity. Okay, so it will, now looking at it in the larger sense, it will produce also the integration of our Earth into the body of the sacred planets. A certain fifth initiation has to be taken by our planetary logos before our planet or any other planet becomes a sacred planet. And then our planet can take up its real role as the base of the spine's center in relation to our solar logos, and help our solar logos take its fifth initiation, whether in this solar system or the next. So it's interesting, isn't it, that this configuration of Pointer and Aries have a very strong planetary effect, and the consequent establishing of a triangular force composed of Pointer, Aries, and our Earth. This triangular relationship, see, we're really dealing with some really high-class triangles here, not just things within our own energy system. This triangular relationship will have a potent effect upon the solar system, and maybe we'll see that here just in a minute, as well as upon the planet itself. And here's another piece of astronomy, and is also one of the factors, not the only one, producing the shift in the Earth's axis. And everything has been in flux for a long time. And stability was reached in ancient Egyptian times, but the Egyptian civilization was much, much older than we give it credit for being. So we could go back 50, 60, 70,000 years looking for a real type of stability in the Earth's axis. Now, since that time, there's been a lot of flux and no settled condition in the Earth's orientation. However, we are again reaching a time when it will be so. And it's very interesting. There is a type of movement in planets, which is not just the gyroscopic movement like a top, but the axis of the planet dips down and up like this. So we have Uranus in a state of just about facing the sun with its axis, and Venus all the way facing what looks to us like below. And Earth itself has been in a similar situation, we're told, in some of the Secret Doctrine series, book series. There was a man by the name of Samson Arnold Mackey, and I guess he was an amateur astronomer, but very profound and an occultist. And he said the Earth has had 3 of these dips, and that Herodotus, the Greek historian, was informed on this point by the Egyptian priests when he visited them and wanted to know what they knew. So there is a cult lore connected with the planets, and they're doing things that determine great cycles and of which we are hardly aware. Right now, our astronomy tells us that, well, these are like permanent orientations of the Earth's axis, angular orientations, but they are not. There are, I forget exactly what the term is called. It might be nutation, not mutation, but beginning with an N, nutation. I'll have to, study that, look that up. But basically, it has to do with this kind of movement, and rather than, in other words, the changing of the angle of orientation of the axis of a planet. And the 2 most outstanding at this time planets doing that are Uranus and Venus. Okay, so we have here the pointer Aries and Earth, and it has a potent effect upon the solar system as well as upon the planet itself, and it is one of the factors it is also one of the factors producing the shift in the Earth's axis. Related to this triangle is a secondary one within our sun's orbit, composed of Vulcan, Pluto, and the Earth. Well, right away you will recognize, won't you, that all 3 of these planets have a very strong first ray. And then he's going to give us a look at how this is found in the archives of the masters. So Earth has a first ray monad. He actually gives that to us later in the book Esoteric Astrology. Pluto, a non-sacred planet, though yet esoteric planet, has a first ray personality. Vulcan, a sacred planet, has a first ray soul. So these three form a first ray triangle of a lesser power than Pointer and Aries, but still subsidiary and serviceable to these great beings. Now, let's take a look at his diagram. Whoop. Okay. Maybe that's it. That's it. That's the diagram. Vulcan, Pluto, and the Earth. And I think when looking at the archetypal figure that shows how triangular relationships work, you could fit these three, Vulcan, Pluto, and the Earth, into that. Now, you know, why is Pointer directly above? Why is Aries to the side? You know, that's a good question. Obviously, Pointer is a star. It's the second pointer. And Aries is an entire constellation. And you would think that the being or the lord of the constellation is a greater being than the lord of a star, a logos of a star. But, you know, he's not saying anything more about this. Basically, what we're looking at is two triangles. We're looking at one major triangle with two major sources, Pointer, Aries, and Earth. And we're looking at another triangle, Vulcan, Pluto, and the Earth. Now, he talks about this, and it's interesting what he says. Okay, what I've said here earlier is that we are looking for the at-one-ment of personality and soul with respect to the Earth, the soul of the planetary logos and his personality. Now let's go on and see what he says about this symbol composed of two important triangles and basically of 5 points. He says, this is one of the most interesting and informative astrological symbols I have given you. Well, you know, with Master DK, astrology is the great third ray science, and it tells us something about his ray structure, that he should be such a master astrologer, and on the second ray as well. So second and third rays, I think, are powerful for him. So he says this is one of the most important and informing. That's an interesting word because it informs the earth. It brings something to the earth in form. He's such a master of the English language in certain respects, you have to watch carefully how he uses ordinary words. Okay. And indicates a most momentous relationship. Now think about your own ray structure. You have here 2 major and 3 minor energies brought into close relation. Now, the planetary energies are the ones that are considered minor in this context, and the zodiacal energy that is here listed, there's one of them, and the pointer is the solar energy. The pointer and the Great Bear, they are considered major energies. So 3 planetary or minor energies and 2 major energies. And this is analogous, he says, and I think you'll see it. Let's see. I just want to get this to move. This is analogous to the 2 major rays and the 3 minor rays, which condition a human being in manifestation. So you have the soul ray, the personality ray. Those are the major ones, and basically that's what Master DK gave to anybody in his group before he gave them the rays of the mind, emotions, and etheric physical body. Now, we could probably try to determine, Vulcan would probably be, well, no, Pluto would have something to do with the astral body, because, the realm of Hades was really the astral plane. Earth would have to do with the dense physical and etheric body, and Vulcan probably with the spiritual will as it works through the mind. Now, the question might be, would Pointer be the personality and would Aries be the soul, or vice versa? I don't think we know enough to determine that necessarily. Okay, so this is analogous to the two major rays and the three minor rays which condition a human being in manifestation. Now, when you look at your own system, you know you have a triangle there between your mind, emotions, and etheric physical vehicle. How are they working with each other? Much will depend upon the stage of evolution you find yourself. Go to Cosmic Fire around page 169, 170, and you will see some examples of how to look at the energy system of the human being at different stages of evolution. Okay, these are the 5 energies which concern the informing life of our planet. Now, the one of them is the Earth itself. And when we talk about the life, we're talking about the logos. And when we're talking about the planet, maybe we're talking more about his objective expression. So these are these are great logoi in relation to each other. The constellation Aries has a logos. It's called the Lord of the constellation. Every star has a solar logos, and every planet has a planetary logos. The outer form is not so important in this case, especially in esoteric astrology. Okay, so they produce, says the Tibetan, in humanity, important things, conscious evolution. So we know that we are unfolding and we're taking our evolution in hand. Direction, and what is direction in this context is pointer, which is basically connected, we could say, with an Ajna center. Finally, Polaris is the major Ajna center in this setup. And the founding of Shambhala on Earth. Now let's think about that. Humanity was created with the coming of the solar angels about 21 million years ago. And then about 18.5 million years ago, Shambhala was founded on the earth. And from that time on, the human being came to himself. In other words, awoke from the semi-sleep that had existed since the solar angels came 2.5 million years earlier. It was a Leo type of awakening, and finally there was self-consciousness, which was very vague in the beginning. So from that time on, the human being could begin to evolve consciously, know what direction to go in. And when you think about the coming of the Lords of the Flame to our planet from Venus, now let's see. Now, I guess you can't help but get into a little bit of cosmic fire here. If I can do this, there. That the coming of the Lords of the Flame was not from the planet Venus so much as it was from the Venus chain of the Earth planetary scheme. So here is the particular globe, whether you count it as the 6th or the 2nd, which released the Lords of the Flame to come into our planetary chain. Well, all of this is there in Cosmic Fire, a treatise on cosmic fire, if we wish to explore it. But let's just say that this triangle we're looking at is responsible for the founding of Shambhala on Earth, and it was the coming of the Lords of the Flame, the 104 plus 1 Kumaras, and maybe 108, because we have esoteric Kumaras too, that established Shambhala upon the Earth, and at first within the Earth chain, and then upon the Earth globe. Okay. Now these 5 energies, and I just read the other day that when he uses the term the will to be, we have no idea what he's talking about, he says. But it is, in a way, the highest aspect of the will. These energies, they are the 5 energies connected with the will to be. I've always considered that the most first ray manifestation of the will, with a lot of the second ray in what we call the will to synthesize. I went over that a little earlier. These 5 energies are connected with the will to be, which I've called here the will to persist in being or in existence. But from the consciousness angle and not the material expression of manifestation. So it's in a way the maybe I can put it here. I'll see. No, that's down there. The will to be, which would be the will to persist in conscious presence. And actually, I've wanted to make that purple, so it stands out from the other things. Okay, here it is. So, the will to be, persisting in being and in consciousness, but not so much in manifestation. Let's just say that when a great being is animated by the will to be, it may have an objective form and it may not, but it definitely persists as a consciousness and as a being. Now, their activity, these energies, their activity and united influence in the realm of consciousness produce the appearance of another triangle. That other triangle is not shown here. Leo, Polaris, and another one of the pointers. So if we were to move over to here, I wonder if we could see anything. Here's Polaris, here's Dubhe, and the constellation Leo would be connected. Let's see if I'm correct on that. So, yeah, I think so. Leo, Polaris, and another of the pointers. But first came this more powerful triangle of Aries, pointer, and the Earth, apparently. Okay, now you can understand the Tibetan's quite a cosmologist here. So Polaris, a great star of direction, the closest of the pointers, and the constellation Leo. Now, a lot of difficulty and trouble comes from the improperly absorbed emanation of this closer pointer, because it gives man, in a way, the whole problem of personality to deal with, which is very separative. Now, think about the fifth ray for a minute. The fifth ray rules the law of cleavages, separation. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that we have the great heresy of separateness, which is dividing human being from human being. And we have seen that when Leo is manifesting, it's considered to be the most human sign and among the most materialistic and separative. Now, this is an early response to Leo. But you kind of look at the places where the Black Lodge has manifested, and they have come in very much under this kind of egotism, group egotism, ruled by Leo. The period of the French kings brought forward the Leo personality of France. It was a time of great selfishness. When we look at Rome, the emperors there were coming in under Leo. When we look at Hitler, we have been told that he had a great deal of Leo in his interior chart. So it can present a problem of personality to the human being until it is synthesized with the other pointer and with Polaris. So, looking back here, we do not see the triangle he's talking about, but we do see Aries, pointer, and the Earth. And now another triangle is coming up, Leo, Polaris, and Dubhe, the closest of the pointers. And these two groups, he says, form an interlocking directorate potently effective in the evolution of consciousness. Now, Leo has so many good qualities. Think of the word that DK gives to describe Leo, and it is sensitivity. Sensitivity to what is the self, to what is the not self. And finally, we end up in a great state of identification. When we think about Leo, I am that and that am I. So it's not simply the separative I am, but it evolves, and through Polaris, you know where you are going. And the Ajna center is activated, the Kundalini comes all the way around and directs everything from the Ajna center, and this in a cosmic sense, not just an individual sense. So I may have put in a few more things. I'm just about at the end of what I want to say for this morning, and I know it is abstruse material. It's way out there. But okay, a triangle most related to being, there is one of them, that's the first, and one more related to consciousness. Polaris is the tail of the little bear, and the little bear is the son of the father. And so it has an ajna center function. And it thus relates, because it is the son, father, son, and the mother, it relates to the second aspect of divinity. And Leo itself, when you take the three fire signs, relates most to consciousness. Aries to will and being, and Sagittarius to the body consciousness. We're all aware of that. So Leo, as the second of the fire signs, relates to the second aspect of divinity, and the little bear, being the son of the father, relates to the second aspect of divinity. As a matter of fact, I wonder if there's a triangle. I think there is, between Great Bear, Little Bear, and the dragon. The dragon, Draco, threads its way between the little bear and the great bear, and represents the Kundalini, which is basically the energy of the personality stored in the base of the spine. So that's another one of those very big triangles that's connected with the one about whom naught may be said. Okay, so we have Pointer, Aries, and the Earth, plus Vulcan and Pluto. They're responsible for the founding of Shambhala on Earth. We have Vulcan, Pluto, and the Earth, the constructive will of Vulcan and the destructive will of Pluto, both finding their way to Earth and both preparing for the reappearance of the Christ. Why is that? Because before the first initiation of humanity, both Vulcan and Pluto are active in the field of service, which is the Earth. So both aspects of the will, the constructive will, sometimes destructive, but overall sacred and constructive, of Vulcan, and the dredging will, let's call it the dredging will, going to the bottom of the personality and dredging up all those things which need correction. That's Pluto. And that prepares the way for the very first initiation that we find coming. So these three are very important in that respect. And then, I'm summarizing now, right? And then, if I could just get this thing to move, then Leo Polaris in the little bear, and Pointer, the Leo pointer, a strong sense of direction, and also contributing eventually to the fusion of soul and personality and to the discovery of your real identity. Or at least, let's say, you discover your soul identity here with I am that, I am that I am, and so forth. So we have three kinds of identity, another triangle. We have personal identity, which so many of us think we are. We have soul identity, which we're learning how to enter by entering the causal body and finding out that's a truer self. And we have monadic identity, which is our real identity, and that is connected more with the sign Aries. So you have, therefore, through these related triangles, the appearance of Shambhala and humanity, the two poles of divine expression, will and activity. And I think that will be enough. I don't want to get into too much. Okay. All right. Well, it just takes us to the point where we're going to take up another triangle next time from related to another star, which is so important to us, Sirius. And it's a burning, scorching, purifying triangle, Scorpio, Sirius, and Mars. You might wonder what's Mars doing with Sirius, but I think we can justify that. Okay, and then I've asked some questions here, but I'm not going to get into them because it's just a little bit too complicated right now, and we have taken our time. We've looked at 2 triangles. We've looked at 2 pointers. One of them having more to do with the unitive factor and the other more to do with the separative factor or the personal factor. Leo being the most human of the signs, and Aries maybe being the most remote, pointing to pure being. And thus, the spirit and humanity, or Shambhala and humanity, were produced. Okay, and then came hierarchy. That's kind of interesting, you know. Sometimes we think, well, hierarchy would precede the coming of Shambhala, but it is not so. Okay, so this is the 24th of June. And whatever page we're on here, we probably are moving about like 1 page. Yeah, 483. So it ends on page 482 to, no. I have 2 keyboards in front of me, and I sometimes forget. And then the science of triangles next time will be number 69, and we'll start at 483. And it will be an evening session at 5 p.m. GMT. All right, well, I know it's been a bit of a cosmic trip out there. Normally, we say, look, I mean, what about the triangle between my solar plexus, my heart, and my ajna center? Okay, that might be enough. What about my crown center, heart center, and throat center? Well, that would be enough, you know, just to get those things really straight in our minds. What about the triangle between the top of the head, the ajna center, and the alta major center, which, when circulating, would give the power to heal and would give the 3rd initiation? Not before that triangle is in effect would this 3rd initiation be possible. So those are the triangles we usually deal with, and tonight we'll have our normal triangle meditation broadcast. Tuya will be giving that, and that will be at 5 p.m. at the usual live link for YouTube. When we do broadcasts, we only have 1 link, and I trust you all have it, but maybe Joe or Michael could put it in for us. But by now, you certainly should have that 1 broadcast link.
Michael,
all right.
A housekeeping
Michael.
note.
Yes.
Wednesday next week is the 1st of July.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. That's right. 1st of July. Thank you. I can always count on you to straighten things out. That's what it is to have the 7th ray. Maybe one fine day I will have it too. But right now, you know, I was an opera director in my earlier life, and another stage director was looking at what I was doing. I kind of remember it. It was 50 years ago or more. And he said, well, Michael, you create chaos and then you organize it. So at least I'm good at the first part. And sometimes I had 100 people on the stage and I had to have all of them doing significant things. At first, it was very chaotic, but gradually it all came around. Okay. There are some of us here, and I know it may be hard to get into this, but is there any question or statement that you would like to ask or offer. And, you know, like I say, it can be on anything in occultism. It doesn't have to just be our particular subject, but our subject has warmed us up to the idea that there are great triangles affecting the Earth, the solar system, even our cosmic logos, and we should be astronomically and also astrologically um, aware of them if we can be. That would be a big help in our understanding of the larger picture. Anything that you would like to ask or state? And like I say, I never limit this to just what we've been discussing. I would say one thing that we should be alert to is the fact that we are trying to integrate our personality, and as DK working with his students showed, they did not have completely integrated personalities. There were trouble areas, and they had to tend to them. And then, as well as integrating the personality, we have to integrate it and fuse it with the soul in 4 different steps, representing the first, second, third, and fourth initiations, at which time you have the complete fusion of soul and personality at that. Now, that's what lies behind all this. It's done in triangular formation, and by the time we finish with the process, we have become the triangle. What is the name of the triangle? The soul is the triangle. What is the name of the true soul? The spiritual triad or triangle. Is the monad threefold? Yes. Will, wisdom, and activity. And one day, when we become Chohans, past the stage of mastership, we will find our residence and our focus within the threefold monad, and we will be the central point. It's always, you know, it's 7s and 3s all the way up. There are other combinations of numbers, of course, and they are important. There are stars and squares and all those things. But eventually we have to learn how to enter the 3 and make it a 1. And that is, we might call this the esoteric approach to the Trinity. You know, they fought wars over whether the Trinity really existed or not, but apparently in ancient days it did exist, going back to Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, and so many triplicities the Tibetan has given us, and yet the 3 are always somehow synthesized into 1. Okay,
Thank you.
anything.
Thank you, Michael. We've got 2.
Okay,
First,
okay.
Ishtar says, thank you for a wonderful subject. May I ask if Alcyd in the Great Bear is aligned with Aries?
Well, you know, that's a good question, because Al-Qaid or Bennett Nash, they are the same. Two names with the same star. And in one way, they would have to be, because they are both distributors of the first ray in a major sense. So by numerical affinity, they would have something to do with each other. Now, let me tell you where I got the numbering of these stars. I used to work a little bit with Marian Walter, who was the youngest of the disciples, and she was the last living of the Tibetans 50-some disciples that he was writing to in the letters in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2. And in some of her papers and her discussions, the way the stars were listed according to Ray were Ray 1, Al-Qaid, Bennett Nash, Ray 2, Mitzar, but there's also a visual double called Al-Kor. I don't think it's exactly related to the Great Bear, but it's interesting that there are two stars there. Alioth, the third ray star, out of alignment, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the material aspect of our solar system and local cosmos is not properly adjusted, leading to what we call material evil. A dim star called Megrez, dim to us, but a fourth ray star, and sort of the juncture, wouldn't you say, between the cup and the handle, just the way the fourth ray is. And then instead of going down this way, we go across to the pointer Dubhe with its fifth ray and its tendency towards separatism, but at least eventually towards the defining of the Leo personality. Remember that the human being has a mind which separates and which consciously separates one thing from another, and it takes a long time to get over that illusion that though things appear separate, they are really unified. So Dubhe is involved in that. And then Merak, the star we've been looking at, it seems to have a six-ray component, but since it's related to Aries, it's involved with synthesis, okay? And then Phegda, the magical star. And when you look at some of the lore, as I've said before, you do see the ancient lore seems to back up these ray assignments. But there is an old saying, and I can't really quote it, but the idea is that when the bear shifts its tail, moves its tail, and there is the end of the tail, that great nations fall. So, there's probably something very occult about that, but it does connect with the first ray. And because it is a first ray star, it will connect with the foremost first ray sign, which is Aries. So basically what I'm saying, Ishtar, is that you can proceed by numerical affinity and find relations that decay does not make. I mean, it would just be overwhelming if he made all of those, but you can find them. For instance, let me just say this. Although Gemini is considered to be a second ray constellation, it is the third in order, and therefore by numerical affinity related to the very active third ray. And you can do that, in other words, proceeding to gather relationships according to numerical affinity is a legitimate way to go. Okay, at least, at my present level of ignorance, that's what I've discovered. Anyway.
Okay,
what else, Michael?
And then Stephen writes, I was listening to another recording, and you said something that puzzled me. You said the second ray monad had trouble with knowledge. Considering the scholarly nature of R2, ray 2, I was wondering why this was so. Too much knowledge?
It's a good question. I think it is the way that the third ray accumulates knowledge. If you go to the beginning of the book Letters on Occult Meditation, you will see that there is an accumulative. I wonder if I can go there. Well, maybe. Okay, let's see if I dare go there. This is, it's a more external approach, and the intuitive registration through pure reason, of knowledge is what is connected with the second ray. So I'll show you the way the third ray operates, if I can find it. Letters on Occult Meditation. Yeah. Okay, and it's right in the beginning of the book, more or less. Okay, and oh no, that's the consciousness of the atom. That's no good.
You didn't click on, put a check mark on the book.
Yeah, I realized that now. Okay, so let's see. All right, this is a fantastic book, by the way. You think that he would be giving very simple things, in these letters, but in fact, they are very occult. Now let's see. I wonder if it's more page 18 or something like that. The ray of the higher self. Okay, here it is. How to break a causal body, basically. How to get rid of a causal body. And think of it in relation to the second ray, than which it is much more different. When the egoic ray is the third, or activity adaptability ray, see, it's in that realm of constant change and adaptation of form, the method is somewhat different. And by the way, while I think of it, Stephen, there are three different ways that are prominent to deal with the second ray. The scholar that looks for meticulous entirety is not on the second aspect of the second ray. The wise one, like the Buddha, is not on the third aspect. It's on the first aspect of the second ray. The method of the second aspect of the second ray and the first aspect of the second ray are very different from Master DK, who has a lot of the third ray in his makeup and is on the third aspect of the second ray, which gives you meticulous entirety, which gives you kind of a bridge between the third ray and the second ray. So while I thought of it, because things slip out, I wanted to mention that. Go to page 518 of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, one of my favorite pages, where the three major aspects of the second ray are shown in great distinction. You would hardly recognize that the one that accumulates all that knowledge using meticulous entirety is the same as the pure love or the wisdom aspect of the second ray. So it's good to keep those things in mind. Now, with respect to the adaptability aspect here, whatever page this is, page 16, how do you destroy the causal body? It's not so much driving forward. That's how you destroy it when you're on the first ray soul. It's not so much the gradual expansion where you include everything, and that's the second ray method, as the systematic adaptation of all knowledge and of all means to the end in view. So there's a big difference here, and I'm going to try to a little more on that. It is, in fact, the process of the utilization. There's that defining word for the third ray, and for the seventh, and for rays underneath it. It is, in fact, the process of the utilization of the many for the use of the one. It is more the accumulation of needed material and quality for the helping of the world, and the amassing of information through love and discrimination that eventually causes the shattering of the causal body. So this, let's see, in these rays of aspect or of divine expression, if I may so call them, the shattering is brought about by the widening of the channel due to the driving power of will in the first case, by the expansion of the auric egg, lower auric egg, the causal body, in the second case, due to inclusiveness of the synthetic ray of love and wisdom, and by the breaking of the periphery of the causal body in the third case due to accumulative faculty and systematic absorption of the adaptability ray. So I would say that right there, we learn about the distinction between the second ray method and the third ray method, but we also learn there is a bridging quality. And if you will read up on, well, you probably have long ago, on meticulous entirety, I sometimes call it ridiculous entirety, just including every possible thing, but not even necessarily knowing how to use it, you will see that bridge between the second ray and the third ray, which Master DK demonstrates. So when we talk about the second ray being the ray of detailed unity, he says emphasize the unity part, emphasize the pattern part, the ray of the divine pattern. So I won't go hunting for all that, but if you go to Esoteric Psychology 2 and reread Meticulous Entirety, and you go to page 518 of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, you will see how different they really are. Now, you can accumulate knowledge for sure, but under the second ray, but it's particularly the third aspect of the second ray that does that, and that's what Master DK presents for us. Maybe we can go up one here. And here is an interesting way of destroying the causal body on the second ray. It says a bit more. When the egoic ray is, oh, I can't get rid of me there. Okay, I'll put it down here. When the egoic ray is the second or love wisdom ray, the path of least resistance lies along the line of expansion of a gradual inclusion. It is not so much a driving forward as it is a gradual expanding from an inner center to include the entourage, the environment, the allied souls, and the affiliated groups of pupils under some one master until all are included in the consciousness. Carried to the point of achievement, this expansion results in the final shattering of the causal body at the fourth initiation. In the first instance, achievement via the power ray, the driving forward and the forcing upward had a like result. And the open channel admitted the force of fire, and it was destroyed. So there are some similarities here with respect to knowledge, but a much more active use of knowledge and adaptability. The second ray type is great at carrying a library on its back, so to speak. It has all the knowledge accumulated, accumulitis, I sometimes call it, and ridiculous entirety. But okay, the third ray uses everything in activity, applies the knowledge, and oftentimes on a somewhat more formal material level. I know that's not a complete explanation, but at least I think it points us in the right direction. Okay. See, a scholar is a different thing than a businessman who's using everything, and wants to be practical about it on the third ray. And a scholar is also a different thing than one who is using higher mathematics and creating these abstract formulas, which the third ray does. So, personally, I have a lot of third ray and second ray. So I've always had to try to think about, what is the real distinction? And I have come to the conclusion that decay is on both of those rays, and it's a bridging that the third aspect of the second ray bridges into the third ray. Unfortunately, you got me going on one of my favorite subjects, which is, let's see. If I go to discipleship in the New Age, and I go to page 518, it will talk about how the Christ is all of these on the second ray. And here it is. Those upon the second ray fall, as you know, into two groups. And then, of course, he throws in the clinker that there are numerous exceptions, so we can't hope to contain it all. Souls on the wisdom aspect go to Shambhala and join the Great Council, and the Buddha was such a one. Those on the love aspect of the second ray tread one or other of the various paths, primarily that of the world's saviors, and they become the divine psychologists and world teachers, and the Christ combined in him all of those traits. And then comes the Tibetan. Those on the second group of souls upon the second ray likewise fall into two groups. They follow the way of specialized detail and of a comprehensive inclusiveness, and are the outstanding occultists. The other group is distinguished by pure love. Of the group which finds its way into Shambhala, such as this disciple was intended to do it, because he had a first ray monad, but he didn't make it. They are distinguished by pure love, and the group that finds its way into Shambhala has a developed simplicity which will govern all relations. So study this area right in here, Stephen. It really gives a good idea of how we can bridge the second and third ray with respect to knowledge. Now, a lot of second ray types, they just don't want to get all of that, those particulars. The third ray type among them, the third sub-ray type among the second ray type, will go for the particulars. So you have a point when you say, why is the second ray having difficulty with the third point in the triangle? And yet it does. The DK tells us about it, that in any triangle there's a first, second, and third ray place, okay? And here's the way I've figured it out, whether it's right or wrong. The first ray point in the triangle has a lot of trouble with love, and they become unloving, and they have to work in the power of love. They're great at taking the kingdom of heaven by storm, but the love energy is the slowest to develop. It doesn't mean it doesn't develop. All these things develop, but they're slower. The second ray type that, rather feels and suffers and includes and identifies and all that, except for one of the types in it has trouble with just knowledge. If you're definitely the scholar type, you can accumulate it, and that will be the exception, but not the pure love type and not the wisdom type. Why bother with all that? We have the principle, says the wisdom type on the second ray. And although he didn't tell us what was going on, the third ray point in the triangle is always so manipulative and kind of intelligently adaptable that it doesn't have to take a stand the way the first ray type does. So this kind of oily, manipulative, and in the early days it can be very full of deceit. That third point in the triangle has to stand still in spiritual being like the first ray type does. And that's what it has the most trouble learning. Not love, but will. So it's a kind of a ring around the rosy there. Okay, I know I've gone on and on about that. Is there anything else, Michael?
And Stephen adds, DK also mentioned he had Ray 1 on the triadal level in Dyna 2.
Yeah, he did. He says, I have first ray students in my groups, and that is because I have somewhat of the first ray in my system, but it is on triadal levels. Now, that is enigmatic, but it can have something to do with the idea that a master has Atma, and Atma brings the first ray in. I would suggest going to pages 176 and 177 in Cosmic Fire to research that particular question and see what he might mean. But he's very well equipped to teach all these different types. He's got the first ray going triadally. Is it the reflection of a partial monadic ray? I think there are two monadic rays, okay? So is it the reflection of one of those monadic rays? Or is it simply because he is a master and he has the atmic quality going for him? He is the second ray master, but the third subray of the second ray is obviously powerful because of the huge adaptability and diversity of his applied knowledge. Active service, we might call it, which is what is that? It's a Buddhic or triadal ability.
So Stephen references page 761 in Dyna 2.
For that question about the first ray being in Master DK, is that the one?
That's my understanding in reading this.
Yeah, I have somewhat of the first ray in my system. Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I think, that's not easily solved, but maybe it can be solved. DK doesn't seem to me to be a first ray master or a first ray monad, but there are two monadic rays. And, does he belong in either of those two categories? I don't know. I couldn't answer with accuracy. I can only offer speculation. The atmic quality brings in the first ray, and every master has it. So is he speaking of himself exclusively, or of all masters who have achieved atmic focus? Or maybe some masters do not achieve as much atmic focus as he has, and they remain with the Buddhic focus, like Master Serapis and Master Jesus. Okay, well, Stephen was always one for details, you know. Long history here. Discerning. Okay,
And
anything else?
that is all that has been written in the chat box, and I see no hands at the present.
Okay, well, you know, admittedly, friends, this material is taken from, you know, his most occult book. What would you think? Would it be Cosmic Fire? Actually, he says no. He says, my most occult book is Esoteric Astrology, because in that book I deal entirely with energies. So the one who deals with energies is the occultist. And somewhere in the Destiny of the Nations, he has a tabulation which basically shows that. As a matter of fact, as you may know, he calls the advanced scientists on the fifth ray the true occultists, because they are dealing with exclusively with energy. But remember that the fifth ray type, interestingly, resolves onto the first ray. See, different ones of the rays of attribute resolve onto different ones of the rays of aspect. The seventh ray goes to the first ray, the sixth ray goes to the second or third, the fifth ray goes to the first ray. You might think it would go to the third ray, but it has a close connection. And the fourth ray, again, goes to the second or the third ray of aspect. And he says it's invariably the case, but I want to say, except when it isn't. Yeah, sometimes you have there was one instance where a seventh ray soul was resolving onto the second ray. And you kind of wonder, how can that happen? But there are always these particulars in any individual. And like he says on page 518, with many notable exceptions, or with many exceptions, something like that. Okay. Any final thoughts?
Rebecca asks, where could we find literature on Master Serapis?
Well, you know, if Tuya is here, there's no, she would be able to tell you, because she's been trying to find it, and it's extremely obscure. There's not much at all. So DK makes an occasional quote from Serapis, showing his highly intuitive nature. But I think there are only a few references. If I get rid of all these, I will not find more than a few. Just 4 references in all of DK to Serapis. Now, historically, you can go, you know, to the internet, and it will tell you something about the cult of Serapis, you know, what he cultivated. But we will not be able to easily find material. He's kept himself very obscure, which is interesting. Okay, so let's see what else. Anything?
Michael, can I add something?
Oh, please do. I was glad you're there. Yeah, go.
So what was the original question? I just heard you
Where
say,
could we
and then
find
there was,
more material?
yes, because there is none. That is a bold line, but then there is something when we think about the Egyptian time, about the Serapis, and you have a lot of iconography about that, and reliefs where he is related Sirius, Isis, very often, and he was in this time, was that second century of that he was like Christ or Jesus, that he was more known in the Roman and Egyptian area than any other, so before Jesus. And what is my thought about it, because he has been living those times that there was this great library of Alexandria, and when it was burned, there are those rumors that there were a huge amount of scriptures has been saved, and then they disappeared, but then that they would have been finding their way to Vatican. And I have mentioned that many times. There was something, was it 7 years ago, something like that, when there was how many, 400 signatures collected by scientists, by artists, and by those big names demanding Vatican to open those old scriptures and writings to the public, or at least to be scholared and investigated. But Vatican has never given this permission. So there is the only hope, if there is something left. But it looks like that it was oral tradition, and it looks like that it was very, very strongly guarded. There are something what was traveling to Roman times, and some scholars who were writing little bits and pieces here and there, but you cannot find from Seraphis anything. But he also, one line to open it is Apis the bull, and that is very interesting relationship when we think about the Nuclear World servers, which are related to the fourth ray and to the sign Taurus. So there is something also to be investigated, because he was called Serapis, and there is the Apis, the name of the
okay.
Yeah. So it is a very interesting studies and difficult study, but there are, when one starts to look, that you can see that how well known he was. There is the temples built for him. This kind of, it was even called a certain area was called in temple therapies or something like that. I don't recall the name. And then, but always you find Isis with him. So there is this relationship to Sirius, and
yes.
we know that Master Serapis is going to Sirius with Jesus. So,
And they are
it's
called
anyway.
yeah. Go ahead
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. No. It is very.
Yeah, Lords of Compassion who go to Sirius, and he's not so much called a Master of the Wisdom as a Lord of Compassion with Jesus, and they're on their way. That's their path to Sirius. That's the path they have chosen, I believe.
Right, and so this is the long plan already. What you can say then, when one has been studying DK, you can put many things together, but you don't find writings, as we don't find writings about the teaching of the Christ, only something what has been written down. But I think the Buddhist has the most of the teaching of Maitreya. So that's why those lines are very hidden, and we can just wonder why.
Mm-hmm. Here is one statement to give you an idea of how he thinks. he's talking here on, what book is it? Esoteric Healing. Stanzas which convey the significance of defects emerging from astrological conditions and producing effects of a planetary nature, involving therefore the horoscope of our particular planetary logos. But these are far too abstruse, elaborate, and far-reaching in their theme, and can be studied and considered only when humanity has reached such a stage of intuitive development that men can, quote, appreciate causes and effects as whole processes and can see both the beginning and the end in one flash of time in space. Close quote.
Michael,
Now, let me finish.
can I?
Yeah, dear, because it's just one more sentence. In these
Yes.
words, the Master Serapis once summed up the matter when endeavoring to train a group of initiated disciples in this mode of approaching vast subjects.
In
Okay?
relationship to that, just one addition of the Egyptian myths. There is a gap which is related to Earth. And when everything is finished, it is the bull which is carrying the gap into the realm of Ra, to the sun. So it looks like that the Taurus is very important for us to study, even from that perspective. It's not directly what he is saying here, but about this cosmology and the secrets of our Earth, what is happening. But anyway, this that the bull is carrying Geb, the Earth, back to the sun.
Well, it's really interesting. It's hard, you know, so much has been hidden or thrown away or destroyed, and we have to piece it together, repiece it together on the basis of the hints that we are receiving from scholars and also from DK. So I think, you know, you've been really doing a good job on that for sure.
May
Okay.
I add a note of caution about internet searches?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
there's a lot of misinformation on the internet that many people take it as gospel.
That's
And
true.
the glamour associated with it is amazing.
Yeah, it can be. Now, this tends to be a little more on the scholarly side, but it is true what you say. There's all kinds of nonsense out there. And again, the disciple has to learn to discriminate. And some things, you know, Michael, they ring true. It's an intuitive faculty, such as the kind of thing. I mean, Master Serapis is the great cultivator of the intuition, as we see here, you know. But other things are just nonsense. So we have to have that discrimination.
Be careful in
Okay.
what you accept. Yeah,
Yes.
it does need to ring true.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and also it needs to stand to reason as much as possible. So, you know, when you find Apis the bull in the name Serapis, there's a link for sure. Okay, well, that might be it for today. And tonight, well, night here anyway, at 5 p.m. GMT, Tuya will lead the normal triangle approach. This, what we're doing here, tends to be, you know, kind of a bit mental and scholarly approach, linking up DK's ideas and so forth. But what he really wanted us to do was to create the triangles of of light and of goodwill, and eventually the triangles of the will to good. And he said it is a work which must go on. So if you want to join us for that, you're most welcome. Okay. So let's just, we'll close with a little alignment. And we'll imagine the starry heavens, and when we can see them with the naked eye, the wanderers, the planets, having all these relations between them, horizontal and vertical. Planets related to planets, and planets related to stars and constellations, as we've seen today for the founding of Shambhala and the factor of synthesis and all the progressive things that humanity is in process of doing thanks to the stimulation from these great sources. And we imagine ourselves on the mountaintop, symbolically, and that the time will come when we realize we are in the midst of a great process called the passage of the energies. You can read about it, I think, in the Capricorn chapter. And all of the linking lines of light are visible, and the many triangles emerge. And let's just remember that we are trying to triangulate the square and move from non-sacredness of the square into the sacredness of the triangle. And we can do that microcosmically, and we can become aware of how that is being done macrocosmically, although our will cannot affect those greater triangularizations, at least not any individual can affect it, maybe humanity as a whole. So let's just close with great invocation. Keep yourself on mute, but you can say it out loud where you are, if you wish. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, thank you everyone, and we'll see at least some of you tonight, I'm sure, for the normal triangles meditation, and then the next day, let's see, I think Michael in the morning, it's IAB.
Yes,
Is that correct?
identify as being. And
Identify
that
as
is a
being
Zoom meeting.
a Zoom meeting. Yeah. Okay. Hope everybody has that link. And Michael, has that link been in the chat box, or I know it's a bit of a hassle to get it.
I sent the link out with the calendar for the week.
Okay. Okay.
And,
That's great.
And yeah, once they've registered, they've got their special link to get in.
Okay. If you have trouble, write to Michael or to me. So you are lightbearer137 at Gmail.
That's correct.
And I'm infinitize8 at gmail.com. And if you don't have the link for identify as being, then you can get it from us. And also at night, the reappearance of the Christ meditation, which Master DK gave in Discipleship, Volume 2. Okay, everybody, thank you for being here, and we'll see you soon. And thanks all. Okay. See you then, and bye-bye for now.